Hey everyone, welcome to Tony for—
All you ever do is complain!
Tony for you. Today I want to vent a little bit about gaming. Specifically, a problem I've been thinking about a lot. Why on earth does it take games so long to release? And not even mentioning the question of why does it seem like when games do release, they aren't even close to ready. Let's tackle one problem at a time. It seems like every single game that comes out has been in the making for at least 5 years. Redfall took 5 years to make. Starfield took 7 years to make. Diablo 4 took 6 years to make. What do all these games have in common? Heaps and heaps of controversy. The quality of these games can be debated. I didn't particularly like any of the above games. In fact, I really only played Diablo 4, and even then only for a couple hours, but the point isn't really the quality. The point isn't even really whether or not they succeeded financially. It's that most games take way too long, and by proxy have way too much money dumped into them. Starfield, for example, took 7 years to make and was financially successful. Forspoken was in development for at least a few years before 2020, so let's just say 5 to 6 years, and it was such a flop the company behind it dissolved. Gaming can't afford to be putting all their eggs in one basket anymore, and for every Starfield there will be a Forspoken, and for every Diablo 4 there will be a Payday 3, and I don't like any of those games at all. After thinking about this a lot, what really pushed me over the edge of making this video is this simple fact. Did you know that between 1997 and 2001, which is a 5-year span, Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, and 10 came out? Did you also know that between 2017 and 2023, which is a 7-year span, Final Fantasy 16 came out? 1 game in 7 years as opposed to 4 in 5. This is really not good. Final Fantasy 7, 8, debatably, 9, and 10 are some of the best RPGs ever made. Hell, Final Fantasy X is one of my favorite games ever made. Final Fantasy 16, on the other hand, was, well, a game so full of plot holes, unsatisfying narrative, and similarly boring gameplay, I forgot about the game pretty much immediately after finishing it. But hey, at least it looks pretty. Therein lies the problem though. Before anyone gets mad at me and thinks I don't know the obvious, yes, I understand the hardware now is much more difficult and time-consuming to program and model for than hardware of the time. You don't get visuals like these without some serious talent and time put into it. I'll raise you another point to counter that, however. I think Final Fantasy X looks better than Final Fantasy 16. Yes, that sounds insane to say a PlayStation 2 game released in 2001 looks better than a game I played on the PlayStation 5 released in 2023. But it has very little to do with the technical abilities of the hardware and everything to do with the art direction of the games themselves. I may not be able to see each individual hair follicle on the main character's face like I can in 16, but Tidus and Yuna are so unique in design and expressive in animation, I'll never forget them, or the moments they shared. Take a screenshot of almost any city or settlement in Spira or Midgar, and you have something wallpaper-worthy at the very least. Absolutely nothing in Final Fantasy 16 stood out as even kind of interesting, aside from maybe the crystals themselves. Everything is just so brown, bland, and boring. I can't remember a single thing that stood out in all the cutscenes between Jill and, Clive. Yeah, that's his name. Sorry, I had to look it up real quick because I forgot. I seriously can't overstate how boring these main characters are. There's also a reason why in discussions of coolest RPG antagonists, Sephiroth is mentioned and not frickin' this guy. His name is Barnabas, by the way. A lot of my problems have to do with the writing, music, and gameplay as well, but that also brings up another problem. I think every single Final Fantasy game that came out in those 5 years, starting in 1997, is more fun than Final Fantasy 16 too. They're not even close to similar in gameplay though, so it's hard to compare. The older Final Fantasy games have turn-based or active time battle combat with semi-linear exploration of a large world. Final Fantasy 16 has a sort of Devil May Cry-esque real-time combat system with pseudo-open world gameplay. The music is forgettable and the characters are uninteresting at best and downright annoying at worst. While for the previous Final Fantasy games, I can name my favorite track from any of them, and I can't name my favorite character. I just like so many in each of the games. Here are my favorite tracks, by the way. With development times increasing, team sizes increasing, and most importantly, budget increasing, you'd expect the writing quality to go up too. But it seems they only really focused on making the game look pretty and emulating Game of Thrones. Maybe it's just the circles I ran in, but I didn't hear anyone talking about Final Fantasy XVI a couple weeks after it released. At least not anything good. Meanwhile, Final Fantasy VII is getting a 3D remake that everyone seems to love, myself included. It took at least 7 years to make a game I thought was just mediocre. That's really disappointing. I don't care if it takes years to perfect being able to see every single particle effect when summoning Phoenix and Ifrit. I'll take low poly Tifa over a hyper-realistic Clive any day. With that being said, I should say this only really applies to games with big studios behind them. Indie games like Silksong can take as long as they need to make. I have the utmost confidence in indie game developers to make a game they are truly passionate about. I guess that is a big part of the missing piece in newer games. Passion. Everything new that comes out is just lacking in a certain passion. There is no love put into these stories, no love put into these characters, no love put into these worlds. And most people may not be able to articulate why they don't care much for these new games, but their brain can. Let's talk about something a little less bleak but still concerning. For those who may not know, I make Shin Megami Tensei and Persona videos, mainly about the real-life history of religious and mythological characters that appear in the games. Needless to say, I'm very passionate about these games. Atlus, the creators of said series, have had some troubling release schedules as of late. Persona 5 came out September 15th, 2016, and Persona 5 Royal, a remake and overall enhancement of the original, adding tons of new content, was released on October 31st, 2019. 3 years to make an enhancement to an already fantastic game. Fair enough, I say. In the following years, with a few slightly before, they released 2 dancing games widely considered to be quick cash grabs with completely rehashed gameplay to the first actually good dancing game, no real story to it at all, inferior or downright bad remixes of songs from the original games, and filled to the brim with microtransactions. Okay, not so great, but let's look at some more. A sequel to Persona Q, which are a series of games that are essentially Etrian Odyssey, with nothing but inconsequential, basically non-canon, fan service of the Persona characters interacting with each other, boiling down to nothing but the tropes of their characters. Catherine Fullbody, admittedly a good remaster of the original game, adding new content much like Persona 5 Royal, but that had its own controversy I won't get into now. Shin Megami Tensei Strange Journey Redux, which is a remake of one of my favorite RPGs ever made, in which they attempted to give it the Persona 5 Royal treatment, adding new content. But in the end, trashing almost everything that made the original game interesting and fun, leaving it as a husk of its former self, and will forever bait newcomers to the series into thinking it's the best way of experiencing the game. Sorry, I feel particularly strong about that last one. What do all these games have in common? That's right, nothing original at all. The only really new games Atlus made at the time were Etrian Odyssey games, which more power to you if you enjoy. I could never really get into them. Now, that brings us to the more recent games. For original games, we have Soul Hackers 2, an at first interesting game with a cool concept of an AI made flesh actually soul hacking the recently deceased to take on a shadowy organization. This game is, in practice, quite half-baked though, as they can't quite follow through with any of their grand or interesting ideas and basically have it boil down to a shallow twist ending betraying any and all interest I had in the characters. Not to mention the Soul Matrix, which is a giant and required dungeon, which is just the same copy-paste scenery over and over and over and over and over and over and over. Persona 5 Strikers, which is a direct sequel to the events of Persona 5, having the Phantom Thieves team up after they meet back together for the first time in a while to take down another world-ending threat. Completely new combat system a la Dynasty Warriors and a story that actually fleshes out the characters and isn't just fan service. I actually really like this game. It's awesome. But the best part of it is, it wasn't even made by Atlus. That's it for the new games. Really only 2, and one of them wasn't very good, and the other one wasn't made by Atlus. Now, for the less than new games. Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne Remastered, which is a remake of a PS2 game running on Unity that adds nothing but pretty crappy voice acting and bad lighting to the game. Persona 5 Tactica, which admittedly is a game with a very unique art style and music, but with a story so bland, full of tropes, and most importantly, non-canon, as it takes place in another world much like Persona Q. In fact, if I explained just the essential story of Persona Q and Tactica, you'd think they were the exact same game. I couldn't even bring myself to get past the first chapter of this game, as it's just more of the same old fan service and paint-by-numbers conversation between the cast of Persona 5. Of which, don't get me wrong, I love, but not this flanderization of them. And most recently, Persona 3 Reload, the big one and the one I have a lot to say regarding. Reload was in development as early as 2019 and released 2024, which adds it to the oddly consistent 5-year game cycle. This game is essentially Persona 3 in the Persona 5 engine. Before I get into it, I don't want to be one of those guys that says old game good, new game bad, soul versus soulless, soy versus soyless, blah blah blah. This is something that is true though. It's missing something. Reload plays great, looks great, sounds great, but is lacking in passion, and I can feel it. Persona 3 FES is a better experience in my opinion. If you have the ability to play the original over the new game, please do it. This shouldn't be hard though, since the new game is pretty dang expensive, but that's a problem for another time. There are a myriad of things changed from FES to Reload, outside of the obvious. FES allowed the main character the ability to switch between any weapon type in the game, effectively making any weapon pickup, regardless of your chosen party members, always useful. They also randomized a lot of the added effects of weapons, adding another layer of excitement and player choice to every chest. This also fits thematically, as you're able to change personas at will, mimicking any other of the Arcana. Why wouldn't you be able to use their weapons too? I know the AI party members get a lot of flack, but I and many others, including the original creators of the game, stand by it being a necessary gameplay and narrative choice. For those of you that don't know, in the original Persona 3 and FES, you cannot control your party members directly. You can only issue commands towards them, like go all out, conserve MP, focus on healing, etc. Katsura Hashino and Shigenori Sojima, the director and artist of the game respectively, as well as being incredibly prolific and accomplished members of Atlus, both are on record saying they're glad they went with the AI-controlled party members. The individual quirks of each party member and your lack of direct control over them is essential to making them feel like important team members rather than inconsequential pawns on a game board. Hottest take so far, but Tartarus is better in the original. It's more challenging and actually feels like you're dungeon crawling rather than sprinting to the collectibles and staircase. The aesthetic of Tartarus is all messed up in Reload too, since there's this strange fog filter on every floor, making the yellow and white segments of the tower particularly unbearable. The combat is downright laughable, even in the highest difficulty, thanks to the Thayer-G super move system. These charged moves are free to use and have a bar to fill that carries over between battles, in which the attacking party member will essentially nuke whatever is on screen and, despite doing elemental damage, pierce any and all resistances. No thinking required, you win. Everything else is just pretty good. The music is good, the graphics are pretty good, the voice acting's pretty good. Yeah, it's just pretty good. In writing this script, I'm having trouble finding things to talk about regarding the new additions to Persona 3 Reload. And that itself is the problem. There is so little to discuss other than the fact that it looks better, it becomes inconsequential in its very existence. Games that are so safe in execution they are meaningless annoy me more than games that tried to do something unique and daring that failed. The best parts of Persona 3 Reload are the things they kept the same from the original, and the worst parts are all the new additions in gameplay and narrative. Once again, this is a new game that comes out focusing purely on looks and graphical fidelity rather than genuinely passionate art direction and a story the writers were excited to tell. This is a paint-by-numbers remake that takes no risks and adds nothing of importance. In fact, it takes away what matters to add superfluous fluff. I didn't get a review copy of this game, and I mostly understand why. Thanks Nam's Compendium for buying me the game, by the way. Maybe I have too high expectations of games nowadays. Maybe I should just take them for what they are rather than constantly imagining how things could be. Or maybe we shouldn't be content with mediocre experiences for full price every half-decade with artificial hype and pre-order bonuses. All I'm saying is, there's a reason why 90% of the games I play through now were PS2 era and before. I'll never stop loving games, but I have stopped loving new games. That pretty much covers my yapping session. I hope this video wasn't too blackpilling. I just wanted to vent some frustrations I had with modern gaming and keep it on the general topic of RPGs for my audience. Like I said, I still love games and hold them in very high regard as an art form, but that's exactly why I'm so critical of them. Special thanks to .zzz, Andre Vinicius da Silva Valens, Arctic Mirror, Kalos, Goose Kebab, Jen Morales, Jeter Michelle, Just a Middleman, Matt M, Not Catchy, Patty123, Stuart Ash, The Digital Dutchman, Video Gamer 75, Zeba Neba, and many more for supporting the channel on Patreon. If you'd like to support, check the link in the description below. Thanks for watching this airing of modern gaming's grievances, and I'll see you in the next Tony For You. Have a good one.